I thought Brian had hung up after our lovely chat, but when I heard his voice again, I realized the call was still connected. What came next shattered everything I believed about my son. It was a quiet Tuesday evening in March, and I had just finished eating dinner alone at the kitchen table where I'd raised Brian all those years. The phone had rung at 7:30, and seeing his name flash on the caller ID always brought me a smile. He was calling from his business trip in Dallas, sounding tired but sweet, the way he always did. We'd had such a warm conversation. He asked about my day, whether I'd seen the neighbors, how my health was. He even asked if I needed anything from Dallas, and my heart swelled with gratitude for having such a thoughtful son. After everything I'd sacrificed to raise him on my own, moments like these reminded me it had all been worth it. "Love you, Mom. Talk tomorrow," he'd said. I heard what sounded like his phone being set down on a table. I was about to hang up when I caught voices in the background. Something made me pause. The call was still connected. My finger hovered over the red button, but a mix of curiosity and growing unease kept me listening. That's when I heard Amanda's voice, clear as day through the speaker. "Did you tell her about the assisted living idea yet?" she asked. My blood ran cold. Assisted living. What was she talking about? Then came Brian's voice. The voice of the boy I'd worked double shifts to put through college. The son I'd done everything to protect and nurture. "Not yet," he said quietly. "She'd fight it hard. But with our credit cards maxed out, we need that house money fast." The room spun around me. House money, my house. Amanda's response hit me like a blow to the chest. "Your mom's place has got to be worth at least $750 in this market. That pays off everything and gives us a fresh start." I clutched the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. They were talking about my home, the place where I'd raised Brian, where his father and I built our life together as if it were nothing more than a pile of cash to grab. But Brian's next words broke my heart completely. "I know, but she's my mother, Amanda, Brian. She's becoming dead weight," Amanda replied coldly. "We can't keep supporting her anymore. Face reality, dead weight." That's what my daughter-in-law called me, dead weight. And then came the final betrayal that made my hands start trembling. "You're right," Brian said after a pause. "She lines be safer in professional care anyway, and we lines finally be debt-free. Stop feeling guilty. I lines handle researching the facilities. You just work on convincing her. She trusts me completely. I can make her believe it is her idea." The phone slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the kitchen table. I sat there in silence, in the home they wanted to take from me, feeling as though everything I'd believed about my son had just crumbled into dust. I sat there frozen, staring at the kitchen walls as Brian's words kept echoing in my head. Dead weight, manipulate her, sell the house. I felt like the ground had fallen away beneath me. That kitchen had been the heart of our lives. It was where I'd packed Brian's school lunches every morning. It was where I'd helped him with homework late into the night. It was where we'd celebrated birthdays, holidays, and milestones together. And now, the son I'd sacrificed everything for was plotting to take it away from me. My name is Dorothy Sullivan. I'm 68 years old, and I live in Tampa, Florida, in the same house where I raised my son as a single mother. That phone call changed everything. But to understand why what happened next was so devastating, you need to know who Brian used to be to me and who I thought I was to him. I became a single mom when Brian was just 8 years old. His father left us for a younger woman, and suddenly, I was on my own with a little boy who kept asking when Daddy was coming home. I worked as a bank teller at First National, but one income wasn't enough to make ends meet. So, I took a second job cleaning offices at night. While other mothers were tucking their children into bed, I was emptying trash cans and vacuuming carpets. I did it all so Brian could stay in his school and keep his friends. I still remember those years so vividly. I'd wake up at 5 in the morning to pack his lunch. I'd drive him to school, work at the bank all day, pick him up from after-school care, help with his homework, make dinner, and then head out to clean offices until midnight. I was constantly exhausted. But every time Brian smiled, or showed me a good grade, or scored a goal in soccer, I knew it was worth it. When Brian started high school, he told me he wanted to attend a private school like some of his friends. The tuition was enormous for someone like me, but I couldn't bear to disappoint him. So I worked overtime every weekend for 4 straight years, taking every extra shift the bank offered. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch and mended my clothes instead of buying new ones. Brian got his private school education, and I was so proud watching him graduate. Then came college. Brian was smart and determined, and I believed he deserved every opportunity. The state school would have been manageable, but he had his heart set on a prestigious out-of-state university. The costs were staggering, but I had already sacrificed so much. What was a little more? I took out loans, worked through holidays, and even sold my mother's wedding ring to help cover his expenses. For years, and more than $100,000 later, Brian walked across that stage to get his degree. I cried tears of joy that day, knowing I'd given him the foundation for a successful life. When Brian met Amanda during his first job, I was thrilled he'd found someone who made him happy. They dated for 3 years, and when they got engaged, Amanda wanted what she called a dream wedding. The venue alone cost more than I made in 6 months. But how could I say no? This was my son's happiness. I dipped into my retirement savings and took on extra work to help them have the perfect day. After they got married, Brian and Amanda started house hunting. Real estate prices in Tampa had skyrocketed, and they were struggling with the down payment. When Brian asked if I could help them get started, of course, I said yes. I gave them $50,000 from the life insurance money I'd received when my husband passed away. Seeing them in their own home, starting their life together, felt like the culmination of everything I had worked for. What Brian didn't know was that the life insurance payout had been much larger than he realized. My late husband had been careful with our financial planning, and his policy was substantial. Between that money and decades of saving from my banking career, I was actually comfortable. But I'd always lived modestly. I drove my old Honda until it died, clipped coupons, and kept my expenses low. Brian assumed I was living paycheck to paycheck on my retirement income, and I never corrected him. In recent months, though, Brian had started asking for more help. First, it was a car repair. Then, it was assistance with utilities when Amanda was between jobs. Then, emergency money when their credit cards got too high. Each time, I said yes without hesitation. That's what mothers do. That's what love means. You help your children when they need you. I noticed Brian seemed more stressed lately, and our conversations began focusing more on my expenses and my big house. Amanda would make comments about me rattling around in all that space, or mention how overwhelming it must be to maintain. They asked questions about my monthly bills, my insurance, and whether I was managing okay. I thought they were being thoughtful. I thought they were worried about their aging mother living alone. I thought they cared. When Brian mentioned his upcoming business conference in Dallas and said Amanda was joining him for a little vacation afterward, I even offered to pay for her flight. I wanted them to have some time together, and I knew money had been tight for them. I was proud of the man Brian had become, successful in his career, devoted to his wife, and still calling his mother regularly to check on her. When friends at church complained about their ungrateful children, I would quietly count my blessings, grateful that my son wasn't like that. The night before they left for Dallas, Brian came over to check on me and make sure I had everything I needed while they were away. He seemed distracted but mentioned they had some big decisions to make about their future. I assumed he was talking about his career, or maybe starting a family. I hugged him goodbye and told him how proud I was, how grateful I felt to have such a wonderful son, who still cared so much about his mother. 3 days later, I was sitting in that same kitchen where I'd raised him, where I'd sacrificed so much, listening to him call me dead weight and plotting to take away my home. That was the moment I realized everything I thought I knew about my son, everything I believed about our relationship, had been an illusion. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs I missed. The change in Brian didn't happen overnight. It was gradual, like watching someone you love slowly turn into a stranger. It started about a year ago when Brian lost his job at the marketing firm. At first, I was sympathetic. The economy was tough, and layoffs were everywhere. When he called to tell me the news, he sounded devastated, and my heart broke for him. "Mom, I hate to ask," he said during that first phone call after the layoff, "but could you help us with the car payment this month, just until I find something new?" Without hesitation, I transferred the money to his account. $450 felt like nothing compared to my son's peace of mind. I told him not to worry about paying it back. Family helps family. That's what I believe. But 1 month turned into 2, then 3, then 4. Brian was interviewing constantly, but nothing seemed to work out. Meanwhile, the requests for help kept coming. First, it was the car payment. Then, it was utilities when their electric bill spiked. Then groceries when Amanda's part-time hours were cut. Each time Brian called, he sounded more desperate and ashamed. "Mom, I'm so embarrassed to ask again," he'd say, "but we're really struggling. Could you help with the insurance payment? I promise this is temporary. What kind of mother says no to that?" I kept transferring money, kept reassuring him that everything would work out. I told him not to feel bad about asking for help. By the end of that first year, I was covering most of their major monthly expenses. But something else was changing too. Brian's calls became less about catching up and more about my finances. He started asking questions that seemed caring on the surface, but felt different somehow. "Mom, are you managing okay with all your bills? That house has to be expensive to maintain, right? Property taxes, insurance, upkeep. It must be overwhelming." Amanda would chime in during family dinners, almost casually. "Dorothy, you're rattling around in all this space. Don't you ever feel lonely here? It must be exhausting for one person." They began bringing up my age more frequently. Little comments about how I was getting older and how they worried about me living alone. Brian would mention news stories about elderly people falling at home or forgetting to turn off appliances, always in that concerned tone. "Mom, what if something happened to you and nobody found you for days?" he'd say. We're 20 minutes away, but that's still 20 minutes too far if there's an emergency. I appreciated their concern at first, but over time, it started to make me feel diminished, like they saw me as fragile and incapable, not the same woman who'd worked 2 jobs, raised a son alone, and managed her life just fine for nearly 7 decades. Their questions about my finances became more specific and more frequent. Brian would ask about my retirement income, whether I was comfortable with my monthly budget, if I'd ever considered downsizing. "Mom, houses like this are worth a fortune now," Amanda would say during visits. "Have you ever thought about what you'd do with all that equity? You could live anywhere, do anything." When I dodged the questions or gave vague answers, they'd exchange glances, not angry, but calculating, like they were having private conversations about me when I wasn't around. Then Brian started talking about planning for the future and making sure I'd be taken care of as I got older. He brought up things like power of attorney and organizing my finances just in case I couldn't manage them myself someday. "Mom, I just want to make sure everything's set up properly." He'd say, "You've worked so hard your whole life. You deserve to have everything handled smoothly." It should have sounded loving. It should have sounded responsible. Instead, it made me feel like he was already treating me as if I were incompetent, as if my decline wasn't just possible, but inevitable. The most uncomfortable moments came when they'd visit and wander through my house, making casual remarks about the extra space and all those empty bedrooms. "Mom," Amanda would say softly, "you could live like a queen in one of those nice senior communities. Imagine not having to worry about maintenance, yard work, or repairs, just enjoying your retirement." When I'd protest, saying I loved my home and had no interest in moving, they'd back off quickly. But I could see the frustration in their eyes, like they thought I was being stubborn instead of simply expressing what I wanted for my own life. The breaking point came 3 weeks before their Dallas trip. Brian called, his voice tight and strained, saying they had a financial emergency. Their credit cards were maxed out. He still hadn't found steady work, and something urgent had come up that needed immediate help. "Mom, I hate to ask," he said softly, "but could you loan us $15,000? I know it's a lot, but we're really in trouble here. I promise we'll pay you back as soon as I get back on my feet." $15,000. It was more than I'd ever given them at once, but Brian sounded genuinely panicked. I wired the money that same day. But something about that conversation felt different. Brian seemed less grateful than usual, almost entitled, like he expected me to solve their problems, as though it were my responsibility to rescue them from the mess they'd created. The next day, I mentioned the transfer to my neighbor, Ruth Martinez. She gave me a look I wasn't prepared for. "Dorothy, honey," she said gently, "how much are you giving them each month?" I hesitated, then started adding it up out loud: the car payments, utilities, insurance, groceries, emergencies. Even I was stunned by the total. I realized I was essentially paying for 2 households while living like I could barely afford one. "Ruth, they're struggling," I said quickly, defending them. "Brian's having a hard time finding work, and they're young. I can afford to help." Ruth's expression stayed skeptical. "Dorothy," she said softly, "Brian's been looking for work for over a year now. At what point does temporary help become permanent support?" I didn't want to hear it, but her words stuck with me. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator and really looked at what I'd been giving them. The number was staggering. 2 days later, Brian announced the Dallas Business Conference. 10 days away, Amanda would be joining him for a vacation extension. They seemed so excited, talking about the fancy hotel, the restaurants they'd try, and the little sightseeing trips they had planned. I watched them plan their getaway, funded by the money I'd sent them during their so-called financial emergency, and something shifted deep inside me. For the first time, I started to wonder if Ruth might be right. I started to wonder if my loving, devoted son was taking advantage of me. I started to wonder if I was being used. But I never imagined how much worse it really was, not until that phone call, 3 days into their Dallas trip. I never imagined they saw me as dead weight. I never imagined they were planning to take my home and shove me into some facility I didn't want. I never imagined my own son could be so cruel. That Tuesday evening phone call haunted me for days. Every cruel word replayed in my head as I tried to process what I'd heard. She's becoming dead weight. We can't afford to support her anymore. Dead weight. That's how my son saw me, not as the woman who sacrificed everything for him. Not as the mother who'd worked herself to exhaustion to give him every opportunity. Just dead weight. The worst part wasn't even the cruelty of those words. It was how casual Amanda had been, like she was stating a fact. And Brian hadn't argued. He'd agreed. He'd simply said, "You're right," before moving on to discuss the logistics of selling my home. I spent Wednesday walking through my house, really looking at it for the first time in months. This wasn't just a house. This was where Brian had built blanket forts in the living room. This was where I'd nursed him through chickenpox. This was where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays and every small victory of his childhood. And now, they weren't just planning to take my house. They were planning to erase our entire family history to solve their debts. But what cut deepest was the detail in Brian's voice when he said, "She trusts me completely. I can make her think it's her idea." That betrayal stung more than anything else. Brian wasn't just planning to steal from me. He was planning to use my love for him as a weapon against me. He was going to exploit the trust I'd built through decades of unconditional support. I could picture exactly how he would do it. He'd start with concern for my safety, pointing to news stories about elderly people falling. He'd remind me how worried he and Amanda were about me living alone. Then, he'd gently bring up the financial burden of maintaining the house. He'd suggest it was time to simplify my life by moving to one of those lovely senior communities. And because I trusted him, I might have believed him. I might have convinced myself he was right. Maybe I was being stubborn. Maybe it was time to let go of the house. That's what made it so vicious. Brian wasn't planning to force me into anything. He was planning to make me volunteer for my own exploitation, believing it was what a loving son wanted for his mother's well-being. Thursday morning, I called my neighbor, Ruth Martinez, and asked her to come over for coffee. I needed to talk to someone. "Ruth," I said as she settled at my kitchen table, "if I tell you something, will you promise to give me your honest opinion?" She nodded, and I told her everything. I told her about the phone call, about what I'd overheard, about the assisted living plan, and how they were planning to sell my house. Ruth's expression darkened with every detail. When I finished, she shook her head slowly. "Dorothy, that's not family love," she said softly. "That's financial abuse. Financial abuse." Hearing her say those words out loud made something click inside me. Brian wasn't helping me. He wasn't protecting me. He was positioning himself to take control of my life, my home, and my money for his own benefit. Honey, what you're describing, Ruth continued, it isn't the behavior of a son who cares about his mother. It's the behavior of someone who sees you as a burden to manage and an asset to liquidate. She was right. Suddenly, so many moments from the past year started to make sense. The constant questions about my finances, the comments about the house being too much for me, the gentle reminders about my age. It had all been part of a pattern, months of groundwork leading up to this. Ruth leaned forward, gripping my hand. What are you going to do? Brian and Amanda would be back from Dallas in 6 days. They were planning to start pressuring me about assisted living as soon as they returned. They thought they had time to wear me down slowly. They thought I was a helpless old woman who'd simply go along with whatever they decided was best for me. They thought wrong. Friday morning, I woke up and did something I hadn't done in decades. I got angry, not hurt, not disappointed, angry. The kind of anger that sharpens your thoughts and strips away every bit of confusion. I had spent my entire adult life putting Brian's needs ahead of my own. I worked 2 jobs to give him opportunities. I sacrificed my comfort to pay for his education. I dipped into my savings to fund his wedding and his down payment. Even recently, I'd been covering his bills, helping him avoid consequences he should have faced years ago. And this was how he repaid me, by planning to manipulate me into giving up my home. By calling me dead weight. I'd raised him better than this. I taught him about honesty, dignity, and respect. Somewhere along the way, those lessons had been lost. Brian had decided that his financial problems mattered more than my independence, my security, and my right to make decisions about my own life. Well, if I was dead weight, then maybe it was time for them to learn how to carry their own load. Saturday morning, I sat at my kitchen table and thought about my situation clearly for the first time in months. Not as Brian's mother, not as someone responsible for solving his problems, but as Dorothy Sullivan, a capable woman who had built her life with her own hands. I thought about my late husband and what he would say. He'd always been protective of me, always encouraging me to stand up for myself. Dorothy, he used to say, being kind doesn't mean being a doormat. People will treat you exactly the way you let them. I'd forgotten that lesson. I'd mistaken being a loving mother for being an endless source of financial support. I'd confused enabling Brian's recklessness with helping him succeed. But I wasn't helpless. I wasn't confused. And I wasn't incompetent. I was a former bank teller who understood financial planning better than Brian ever would. I owned my house outright. I had significant savings. I was fully capable of making my own decisions. And now, I'd overheard my son plotting to take all of it away from me. As I sat there that Saturday morning, I realized something that would have shocked Brian and Amanda. I didn't need them. I never had. I'd been choosing to support them, choosing to prioritize their needs, choosing to make their problems my responsibility. But choices can be changed. By Sunday evening, my mind was made up. Brian and Amanda thought they were clever, planning to manipulate a helpless old woman. They thought they understood exactly how this would play out. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. Monday morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Brian and Amanda had 5 days left in Dallas, 5 days before they returned to execute their plan to manipulate me into giving up my home. But I had 5 days, too, and I wasn't going to waste a single one of them. My first call was to Thomas Walsh, a real estate attorney whose office I'd driven past countless times in downtown Tampa. When I explained that I needed to understand my legal rights regarding my property, he squeezed me in that same afternoon. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said kindly after reviewing my documents, "since the house is titled solely in your name and there's no mortgage, you have absolute authority to sell it. You don't need anyone's permission. The decision is entirely yours." Exactly what I wanted to hear. "How quickly can a sale be completed?" I asked. "With the right beer and circumstances, as fast as a week," he replied. "Cash buyers, no inspection, clear title. It's rare, but absolutely possible." I left his office with a list of reputable cash buying companies. The first one I called was Pinnacle Property Investors. "We specialize in quick estate sales," Mrs. Sullivan, their representative, explained warmly. "Could we evaluate your property tomorrow?" Tuesday afternoon, a professional appraiser walked through my house, taking photos and detailed notes. By evening, Pinnacle made their offer. Based on recent sales and the county tax assessment, they offered $750,000 in cash with a 5-day closing. $750,000. The exact number Brian and Amanda had whispered about in their cruel little plan. "We can close Friday if you're ready to proceed," the representative said. I signed the contract without hesitation. Wednesday morning, I opened a new bank account at a completely different branch, one Brian had never set foot in. Then I toured 3 senior living communities Ruth had recommended. The third one, Sunset Manor Apartments, was perfect. It wasn't an assisted living facility like they had planned for me. It was independent living, clean, safe, quiet, and full of active, vibrant people my age. "We have a fully furnished 1-bedroom available immediately," the manager said with a smile. "You could move in this week if you'd like." I wrote the check on the spot. Thursday was packing day. Ruth came over to help me sort through for decades of memories. I kept my photo albums, my mother's china, a few clothes, and the pieces of furniture that carried sentimental value. Everything else, it could stay with the house or go to charity. "Are you sure about this, Dorothy?" Ruth asked gently as we folded my clothes into suitcases. I smiled for the first time in days. "I've never been more sure of anything," I said. "They want my house so badly. Let them explain to the new owners why they think they're entitled to live here." Friday morning, the closing took place at Thomas Walsh's office. I signed the papers, received the cashier's check, and deposited $735,000 the net after closing costs into my new account. That afternoon, I moved into my sunny 1-bedroom at Sunset Manor. The apartment was small but bright, with a lovely view of the community garden. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. Friday evening, I made one last call to a locksmith. I had every lock on my old house changed. Then I walked inside one last time and placed an envelope on the kitchen counter, right where Brian and Amanda would see it the moment they got home. Inside was the letter I had written carefully the night before. Dear Brian and Amanda, if you're reading this, you already know the house has been sold. I overheard your entire conversation on Tuesday night when Brian forgot to hang up his phone. I heard you call me asterisk dead weight. Asterisk. I heard you plan to manipulate me into assisted living so you could sell my home and pay off your debts. The house sold for exactly what you calculated. Asterisk $750,000. Asterisk. That money is now safely in my new bank account, where it will stay. I've moved somewhere I am appreciated. Asterisk not treated like a burden. Asterisk you can discard. Your belongings have been packed and placed in the garage. You have 30 days to collect them before they're donated to charity. I hope this teaches you something important. Asterisk underestimating people has consequences. Asterisk. You thought I was helpless. You thought I was dead weight. You were wrong about everything. Asterisk love. Mom. Asterisk. I laid the envelope gently on the counter. Then, without looking back, I closed the door behind me and walked away. Saturday morning, I woke up in my new apartment. The sunlight streamed through the curtains, and for the first time in a long while, I felt free. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, sat by the small kitchen table, and read the newspaper in peace. That same afternoon, Brian and Amanda were flying home. I imagined them unlocking the front door, ready to settle back into their lives, expecting to start working on their helpless mother as planned. Instead, they would find changed locks, a sold house, an empty kitchen, and an envelope on the counter waiting to shatter their world. I didn't feel guilty. I felt relieved. For the first time in over a year, I wasn't carrying anyone else's bills, debts, or bad decisions on my back. I was free to live my life on my terms. Brian had called me dead weight. But as I sat there in my bright little apartment, I realized he had been projecting. He was the one who had become the burden. He was the one draining my resources, my energy, my peace. And now, for the first time in his adult life, he would have to stand on his own 2 feet. It was a lesson that had been long overdue. That afternoon, as I arranged my photo albums on the shelves, my old phone rang. The caller ID showed Brian's number. I didn't answer. An hour later, it rang again, then again. By evening, I had 12 missed calls and several voicemails, each one sounding more frantic than the last. The first few were confused. Mom, our key isn't working. Are you okay? Call me back. Then came panic. Mom, where are you? The locks are changed. There's an envelope with our names on it. What's going on? Finally, came the devastation. Mom, I read your letter. Please, call me. We need to talk. I can explain everything. I deleted every single message without listening to the end. Sunday morning, Ruth called. Dorothy, she said, her voice tinged with something between satisfaction and sympathy. Your old neighbors saw Brian and Amanda at the motel off Dale Mabry Highway last night. They said the two of them looked shell-shocked. I smiled softly to myself. Good. Now they knew what it felt like to have their security ripped away without warning. The calls kept coming all week. Brian left desperate messages, saying we needed to work this out and find a solution. Amanda left crying voicemails, insisting it had all been a misunderstanding. But there was no misunderstanding. I had heard every word they said, exactly what they thought of me. Exactly what they planned to do in their own voices. By Wednesday, Ruth told me Brian had called her, begging for my new address and phone number. She refused, of course, but she said his voice sounded completely panicked. He told her their credit cards were maxed out. that they couldn't afford to keep staying in hotels much longer. He asked if I knew where you'd moved, Ruth said gently. Said he just wants to apologize. I laughed quietly when she said that. I was sure he did want to apologize, but not because he regretted what he'd planned. He only regretted that it hadn't worked. 2 weeks later, I had settled into my new life at Sunset Manor ***. I joined the book club. I started watercolor painting classes. I volunteered in the community garden, tending flowers under the Florida sun. My neighbors were friendly, thoughtful people who valued companionship and conversation, not what they could get from me financially. Ruth visited often with updates from the old neighborhood. Apparently, Brian and Amanda had tried contacting the new owners of my house, demanding to know how to reach me. The new owners had threatened to call the police if they didn't stop harassing them. Brian had even shown up at Ruth's door multiple times, sometimes with Amanda, sometimes alone, begging, looking exhausted and unshaven. Ruth shook her head as she told me. He said they're facing bankruptcy. Said they were counting on your house to solve all their problems, and now they don't know what to do. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of the old sympathy, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. They had counted on my home to save them. They had counted on exploiting me, the very person who'd sacrificed everything for Brian's future. Now they were finally living with the consequences of their own choices. A month after Brian and Amanda returned from Dallas, I drove by my old neighborhood. Not to see them, not to gloat. I just wanted to see the house one last time. The new owners had already made changes, fresh paint on the shutters, bright flowers in the front yard, children's bicycles leaning against the driveway. A real family was living there now, a family building memories, not scheming to exploit their relatives for financial gain. I sat there for a moment, taking it all in, and then I drove away with an unexpected sense of peace. My house was in good hands. My money was secure. And finally, my life was my own again. 6 months later, Ruth came by with news. Dorothy, she said gently, Brian and Amanda divorced. It didn't surprise me. The pressure of debt, the chaos they'd created, the cracks in their marriage, all of it had finally caught up to them. Brian moved back in with his father in another state. Amanda returned to her parents' house. The last I heard, Brian was working 2 part-time jobs, trying to dig himself out of the mess he and Amanda had made. No more business conferences, no more dream vacations, no more living beyond their means on someone else's back. He was finally carrying his own weight instead of calling his mother dead weight, while relying on me to keep him afloat. And as for me, I was thriving. At 71, I was more independent and more content than I'd been in decades. I had wonderful friends, meaningful hobbies, and a full calendar of activities at Sunset Manor. I changed my will. Every penny of my estate now goes to 2 causes that matter deeply to me: the local animal shelter and a scholarship fund for single mothers. Brian will inherit nothing. The irony isn't lost on me. He once plotted to leave me with nothing. In the end, that's exactly what he'll receive. Sometimes I think about calling him. Sometimes I wonder if we could rebuild any kind of relationship. But then I remember his voice on that call. She trusts me completely. I can make her think it's her idea. And the thought passes as quickly as it comes. Trust, once shattered, doesn't grow back. I've learned something through all of this, something painful but freeing. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by respect, by love, by how people treat you when no one's watching. My real family now is Ruth, my neighbors at Sunset Manor, and the friends I've made in this new chapter of my life. People who see me as *** Dorothy Sullivan ***, intelligent, capable, deserving of dignity, not as dead weight to be managed and manipulated. I'm exactly where I belong, living the life I chose for myself. And Brian is finally solving his own problems without using his mother as a safety net. It's a lesson that was long overdue, and one I was happy to teach him. So, that's my story. Do you think I was too harsh for cutting Brian off completely? Or do you believe he got exactly what he deserved after calling me dead weight? I'd love to hear your thoughts.